Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show. It's the late night edition. I am your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, going on a little bit later, closer to 10 o'clock PST, closer to 1 a.m. for you East Coasters. Sorry, with the kids running around, some other stuff, prep time and other things going on. I just couldn't go on at the 9 p.m. time, so a little bit late today, but you know what? The show goes on. Also got caught watching that Rice UTSA overtime game. That was just a phenomenal one to watch, especially if you read a little bit of FTN content today. You know, we like the CUSA slates. We don't get them very often, Conference USA, but we used to, and they're definitely fun. And having a couple of Rice players certainly did well with that one going the extra period. You know, the chalk of the slate there for Rice was Quincy Oliveri, and he had a real nice game, 30 points, 8 rebounds. But I went a little bit different and got the low-owned Max Fiedler, who I put on like 35 to 36. That's kind of what my projection had. And he had a triple-double, 24, 13, and 11. So he obliterated that. Certainly a little bit of luck there, but I'll take it. My man Travis Evie, who was the posh play of the day. Horrible first half. Ends up with 19 points, 2 rebounds, 5 assists, and a steal. Knocked down 3 threes, over 30 fantasy points. That's a win at his price point, which is low 7K. The posh play of the day continues to be a dub. We did say that Rice mini stack felt a lot like Saturday's Tulane mini stack. Pairing up 2 Rice players felt like a great, overall play. UTSA, a fantasy-friendly unit. CUSA games tend to be pretty fantasy-friendly. We don't have our man Jelly because, for UAB, he's injured, so we had to look elsewhere. I haven't faded the Pokemon Master, as I call him, Travis Evie, in a single Rice slate yet. Rice has been on the slate, I believe, 3 or 4 times over the last 3 years, and Travis Evie has been on the team for that duration, and he has never failed me once when they're on the slate. They've actually been on the slate twice this year, which is, always fun. He was, what was it, earlier this season? We had him at like 8% owned then too. What was it, against the Western Michigan game, and he had 47.5 fantasy points at 7-7 against them. I didn't use him. I guess they were on the Texas game too. I didn't use him there at the 7-3 price, but he came through there too with 30 fantasy points, and then he comes through with another 30. He just doesn't fail. He's such a good player, so underrated. There was a game a couple of seasons ago where he just went completely berserk, and it was against the same UTSA team. They looked a little different with Javon Jackson, but he dropped 36 real against them, 8 triples, not a lot of peripherals, but over 40 points. That was a game that I had him during that time as well. He's just really fun player to watch. And this Rice team is actually pretty fun in general. They have a lot of continuity. They've got some real big star power with Fiedler, Oliveri, and Evie. They're 13-5. Scott Harris got them running, and hopefully they can do some damage here in the CUSA, and maybe they'll go dancing, or at the very least make the NIT. It might be better for DFS purposes if they make the NIT, because probably get them for a couple of games as opposed to, the tournament. The big dance. So real nice slate. I just want to go over it here a little bit. Going a little bit more with the semi-balanced as I do. Eric Gaines, he was an obvious call with Jelly out. He was super chalk. I did have them Rice mini, had Norchad O'Meara because, I'm always going to play what I perceive to be the high post versus the Syracuse zone. Love Jordan Miller as well. I thought they would both have a chance to play that spot. Miller went off for 32, Norchad 41. You could have played them both if you could afford it. Pricing is getting tighter, which I love. Makes it harder to just plug everybody in. I did end up getting a little bit lucky with a North Texas kid. Because last guy in, I had this range, Abu Osmain, who has really solid rates. He ends up just, going nuts, 13 points, 9 rebounds, 4 steals, 34 fantasy points, got lucky with him. Jordan Rawls of Western Kentucky, he was nice. Now, the mistake that I made tonight, and it didn't matter because it was a good night, was playing Marshall from Western Kentucky as a value over Loven. I wasn't really around for swaps, and I was already locked into Reuben Jones as my primary, value there for North Texas. He had a nice game, 19. So that was the one spot that if I had to do over, I would definitely do again. But hard to argue with tonight's results. A lot of good things happening. Our bets, Adam Young, who is a an editor for us, but also does, content as well. Real sharp guy. He had a nice, 5-0 day, I think, on his parlays. Still finding his footing on props, but it was a really nice betting day for the team at FTN. I'm getting into these alt spread things. I was on USC or UCSB, the Gauchos, who have been really good on the road. I've noticed that. Took them alt spread at +5.5. They ended up winning outright, which was nice. And then, of course, the Norchad O'Meara rebounds prop, Dawson Garcia's PRA prop, and AJ Hoggard's earlier in the day PRA prop, which was only 21.5. It was -130, but we gotta take what we got, and that was a good one. Just a solid day overall. Feel very positive about it, and looking forward to the slate that is coming up here. 11 games. Just like I said, feeling really, really positive about things going into this one, and I think we're going to be able to do some damage here. There is two qualifiers, a $60 and a $250. So if you're looking to play the qualifier, definitely do so. I am hoping to ride tonight's momentum into tomorrow so that we can / today, depending on when you're watching this, so that somebody at the FTN spot, if not me, is able to lock down a seat. We're very early. There's a lot of seats available, but let's get ourselves a seat. Let's do it. All right. I am going to go game by game, breaking it down here. There's 11, so I'm going to do my best to give you guys the best possible information that I can as we do. Tomorrow's article will be done by Mike, but I'll still be around in Discord. My tracker will be filled up. I will have bets. I will have all kinds of information going on, even though I'm not writing the article. And I'm trying out different things throughout with the article. I'm doing, top play style, game by game style, by price point. So I'm just trying some different things to help you guys out. I know some of you are in a little bit of a funk, but it seems like we broke out of that over the weekend with some of our low-owned guys, like from Tulane, tonight from Rice. Feels great when that happens. Let's keep going into the big 11 game slate for Tuesday. Starting off, I'm going to talk about South Carolina and Ole Miss. Lots of SEC games, as is pretty typical for Tuesday slates. Starting with the South Carolina side, Michi Johnson and Gigi Jackson have been the two primary targets for South Carolina. There hasn't been a lot of fantasy goodness coming from the side of Gigi Jackson lately. He has kind of hit, and I know he likes to go by Gregory now, so he's growing up. Price there at 7.6. He's kind of hit a freshman wall. You look at Tennessee, he was just terrible. They shut him down. That Ball's defense against Kentucky, he's okay, 21, but at 8.3 that doesn't work. And then Texas A&M, he just had 13.5. So that's pretty rough 3-game stretch. He has taken still 8+ shots during those 3 games. So he's still firing away, still trying to do his things, but his rebounding, which was so strong for the first, 2.5 months of the season, month and a half, whatever, has disappeared. So we'll have to see if that comes back to him here against Ole Miss. Before I continue on, I do want to say there is going to be a momentarily break that I'm going to have to take. Not quite sure where that's going to end up happening, but there is going to be a 3 to 5 minute break that I take in the middle of the show. I apologize for that in advance. Just want you guys to be ready for that. Get yourselves a cookie, some milk, if you will, when that happens. All right. Okay. Cool. I always get so congested when I'm on the show being around here. My cat's area is over in that vicinity. I think I might be allergic to this damn cat now. All right. Michi Johnson, 7.7. He has been pretty much the opposite. He's, didn't have a great game last time out, but he's been still progressing, playing quite well, transferred up from Ohio State, and his, he started the season pretty lackluster, lackadaisical, however you want to phrase that. He had, his first 5 or 6 under 20 fantasy points while Gigi was tearing it up. Now Jackson's starting to struggle, and Michi has really stepped up. He's taken 8+ shots in 3 straight, but 2 of the last 3, 16 shots, with a lot of those being threes, 9+ being triples in 2 of the last 3. So taking a lot of shots there. Like his opportunity, his chances to bounce back against this Ole Miss team, I think they can certainly do some damage. I think at home they can score some points, and this one can be played into the 70s for both sides. Michi Johnson has a shot rate of 25.5%, usage rate of 24.5%, and an assist rate of 25.5% as well, shooting 34% from long range. So all of those are career highs 2021, when he's a freshman at Ohio State, he played in 17 games sparingly. He did shoot 50% from long range on 12 attempts. I don't really consider that his career high, even though it technically is. He has shot 111 attempts in 15 games, so 2 less, and a million times more shots, but he's shooting 34%. So he's definitely got the green light. And in SEC play, which has taken place in just 4 games for them so far, he does have the 5th best usage rate at 30.2%. So Michi is doing some really strong things here, while Jackson has been struggling. They do have injuries to worry about here. With Hayden Brown, he has been a guy that's been a very important piece to them. He's dealing with a thigh issue. It does sound like he's going to play. Those thigh issues can be a little bit tricky, though, whether that's, a thigh bruise from a dead leg or whatever. Those can sometimes be a little bit more harmful than maybe they sound. If that gets cramped up, he could end up sitting out or being relatively limited. So we'll see what happens there, but he's likely going to play. If he's limited, though, we do have Josh Gray, who saw a minute spike against Kentucky, but not against Texas A&M. There is talk of him getting more playing time. Hankin Sanford, who has been on South Carolina message boards, Daniel Hankin Sanford, somebody that they really like. They think he's going to be an important part of the program eventually. He has a lot of high upside, still very, very raw. But you'll see there's certain games where they are using him in more minutes in matchups where they think that, his athleticism can give teams trouble. He did play 16 against Texas A&M last time out. Only 7 fantasy points, but he did take 4 shots, had 3 rebounds. Somebody that, just to be aware of if you need a large field value that's going to be sub 2% owned. He's somebody to definitely potentially look at. I like him a lot better than someone like Bosman's Verdonk, who we know is going to give us essentially nothing when he's on the floor except standing around and giving fouls. Last year it was Javon Benson, who we thought was going to end up being something special, and that hasn't worked out for him. He probably needs to go ahead and transfer. Other guys to look at, Chico Carter at $5K. That's a real nice price for him. We know he's going to play a lot of minutes. Fantasy points haven't necessarily been there, but again, the last 3 games have been against some pretty tough defenses, Tennessee, Kentucky, which Kentucky's not been the best defense this year, but they're still, fairly good. And I know South Carolina won that game, but it was really on the back of 1 or 2 players, and Kentucky just looked really bad. Guys like Chico still kind of struggled and didn't get their shot off, and were just an afterthought. He is capable of putting up 40. We've seen it before, so I'm interested in him to a degree at this price point here. Jacoby Wright, 3.5, probably not looking at him. We do have Zachary Davis, who has seen his minutes bounce around. He did play 22 against Texas A&M, sitting there at 3.2. He did start in that game. That was with Brown sitting out. So with Brown expected back, Davis would be a afterthought. But if we see Brown end up sitting out, or he can't warm up, or something happens to where he's not able to go, Zachary Davis at 3.2K becomes a pretty viable value option that we can look at. But we'll have to see how that shakes out. It is the first game on the slate, so we'll know fairly early. On the Ole Miss side, definitely some guys to look at. We got burned. Thankfully, we still had a really nice slate, but damn, I got burned hardcore, and I know a lot of you did, by Jamin Brakefield. Just a terrible game. Had some really foul trouble, but just didn't get going. Ole Miss only scored 58 points against Georgia. We should start respecting that Georgia defense. They're actually holding guys under fantasy averages, their typical fantasy average, and it's not been the fantasy-friendly game that Georgia games used to be. So he did have a pretty poor outing there, 7.6 rebounds, 3 fouls in 25 minutes. Price is up to 6K. I do think it's fine to go back to him. This is like one of those spots in GPPs, where, the industry was on a guy. He basically busted. Going back to him the next slate, you're going to get him way under owned. People are burned on him. They're not going to use him. You can sit there and get him, in a potentially a decent spot, and have him bounce back in a big way. We saw that with Geronimo from Indiana a couple of games ago, not just last game where he was nuts, but a couple games after that bad bust where he was industry chalk, and people haven't been going back. And that's just an example of how that can sometimes work out. Deshaun Ruffin is labeled with a questionable tag. He was sick over the weekend. I expect him to play. Doesn't really matter. They're not giving him the minutes that he probably should be getting. Volume score, high usage rate, but Matthew Morrell is basically the alpha there right now for Ole Miss. He's sitting there at 7K. I like this spot for him. I think he's an excellent GPP option. You saw he scored almost 30 against Georgia. He's just on the court for basically the entire game. He's taking a ton of shots, a lot of threes, gets to the foul line at a high rate. He will contribute it with peripherals at times. It's not his forte, but he's definitely able to do so. We see he had a really bad game against Tennessee and Alabama, both really elite defenses in the SEC, but came back against Auburn, dropped 38, 28 against Georgia, 23 against Mississippi State. I think he's just fine here against South Carolina if you want a 7K. Last guy in main lineups, I think it's fine. Otherwise, a pretty high-level elite, borderline GPP, optimal type of guy. Other options here, Miles Burns at 5'8", the JUCO transfer. The minutes are still solid, but he's really struggled. He's been kind of a non-con guy. He was really strong in the non-con. Now that we're in the SEC play, he's kind of struggled. We did see Josh Mballa return last game, which did hurt to a degree. Brakefield, he only played 9 minutes, but still that was enough to throw things out of whack, because that would have been another 9 minutes going to Brakefield, essentially, maybe a few to Akwuba. And speaking of Akwuba, he played just 8 minutes last game against Georgia, so he's an afterthought. Can't look at him either. We did see Amory Abram after, being so strong in the non-con. His minutes disappeared in a conference play. With Ruffin out with the illness, he played 30 minutes, took 16 shots against Georgia, so he is worth looking at as well. Even with Ruffin back, I do think Abrams, he's talented enough to have consideration of exposure to. We've seen it early on in the season. He's still pretty young. I think I like this matchup against South Carolina. If we think he can get approximately 18 to 25 minutes, he becomes a pretty attractive option overall. But that's probably an unlikely feat with Ruffin expected to go. So really it's Morrell. You're paying that 7K price. I like Brakefield for GPPs going back there. And on the South Carolina side, you're really just looking at Michi, G.G. Jackson, and if we get news that Brown is limited or out, we have Zachary Davis sitting there at 3-2, but we're likely going to have to skip over this game for our main team and look elsewhere. Next game on the slate is Tennessee versus Mississippi State. Not a huge fan of this one either. There's really, SEC games in the past majorly fantasy friendly, but there's a lot of good defenses in the SEC this year, and there's actually some teams with relatively poor offenses, or inconsistent offenses, maybe a better word. For the Vols, Josiah Jordan-James being back at 6'2", that's always a nice GPP price for Triple J. He's rarely owned. He has capabilities of flirting with a triple-double. He's been dealing with a nagging knee injury, multiple issues. He just hasn't looked himself. We saw early on in the season he popped a couple 30, 39s and just hasn't been able to get things going here. So I am a little bit concerned with maybe trying to use him, but I do like him for GPP as his price continues to sit there at a low level. He's falling down to 6'2" after sitting up there at almost 8K to start the season. That continues to go down even after this game, when we get over the weekend of Vols, game on the slate, then I'm really going to be considering him regardless of matchup. The freshman, Julian Phillips, he had a really nice outing against Vanderbilt, terrible against Kentucky. That is sorry about that, guys. 6'2", GPP option. You saw him against Kentucky. The Vols team in general was really bad. He had 4 fouls, which really affected him. He does start sitting there at 6'2". He has a ton of upside. I like him for tournaments, like him for GPPs, large field, or single entry, honestly, because I think that he has the kind of upside in this particular matchup to really bust out. The Mississippi State defense has been good, but they've been susceptible against wings, and Phillips is the type of guy that his athleticism could give them trouble. You also have Santiago Vescovi and Zakai Zeigler, who have been really solid, safe, consistent options, but you're not looking at paying 6-7 for Zeigler or 7-1 for Vescovi. At least I'm not. Don't love the spot. I think they're priced fairly, or even maybe a little bit too much in Zeigler's case. You do have Tyreek Key sitting down here at 4-4. Played 31 minutes against Kentucky, 24 against Vanderbilt, 25 against South Carolina, and 21 last time against Mississippi State. So he is getting the playing time. He is a value option, somebody that we can look at, but he just hasn't been doing it, man. Indiana State, he was a sicko. Early on in the season, he was a sicko, but things just haven't been really working out for him all that well in SEC play. He's been a little bit overwhelmed, but we are still seeing him in the starting lineup. And sometimes with these value guys, you have to just eke out, the 2.5 to 3.5x. You're not always going to get the 4x plus. And the fact that he's remained in the starting lineup and the fact that he's playing over 20 minutes at least makes him in consideration to a degree. All right. So I keep getting a message here about something that I have to step away for. Other guys to look at here. Jonas Idu was a value option early on in the year. Minutes kind of sporadic now. Euros Plavsic is starting. Did play 25 minutes in that last one. I don't love the using him. He's pretty raw, even though he's been in CBB for quite a while. He's really limited. He did take 11 shots last game, and he has scored 25 plus fantasy points in back-to-back games. So I'm curious if people are going to end up using him at 4-1. I don't think it's a very good idea. If he was priced maybe, God, it's pretty cheap already, but like 3.5, 3.8, I think I might be more willing to do so. He is playing some pretty considerable minutes, and his price point was sitting there at mid-5s there for a while after he had a 30 against EKU. But I don't like him to replicate at all like what he did against Kentucky. It was just a really bad game for the Vols offense in general, and Euros was getting a lot of kind of easier opportunities down low where he didn't have to do a whole lot on putbacks or easy setups. So I'm not really looking to use him, but I will be looking to see what kind of ownership or what kind of expected ownership people are going to have on him and what people are saying. Now, Tennessee, when they played Mississippi State at home just the beginning of this month, 13 days ago, it's 87-53, just a total annihilation. Phillips had 11 and 7. Vescovi had 14. Oliver and Qua had 10. Euros there had 10 and 3. Ziegler had 11, 4, and 10. Triple J played approximately 17 minutes, had just the 4 points, really kind of just coming back for him. On the Mississippi State side, Tolu Smith really started his slide. He had a nice game last time out, but Tolu has really been monstarred. DJ Jeffries was horrible. Deshaun Davies was terrible. My value extraordinaire the last couple of slates, Eric Reed, he's been terrible, or he was terrible in that game. The only one that actually did well was Tyler Stevenson, who started in that particular game, but hasn't started since. He's been on the bench the last 3 and played less than 12 minutes. So you really can't use anybody on the Mississippi State side. I don't think we want to get in the habit of using anyone against the Vols anyways. The road, Mississippi State's at home. Maybe it's a little bit different. You're looking at some fair prices. Tolu Smith at 7-1. If any other matchup, I might be tempted to go back to him for GPP. We did see a nice outing from Shaquille Moore recently. We have Eric Reed sitting there at 4-1. We know he's going to start and play a lot of minutes. Deshaun Davis is 4-8, my former go-to guy when he was at Oregon State. Sitting there at 4-8, starting, playing a lot of minutes. Cameron Matthews is interesting with guard forward eligibility, but there's just nobody on the Mississippi State side worth using. The Vols defense is typically going to give guys problems, and Tolu, who has been a guy that I want to go to at expected low ownership, and I have done it several times this year, but he was just in a streak prior to the Auburn game. He was on such a slide, under 21 fantasy points in 4 or 5 straight. Really nice to see him break out and have a 20 and 10 performance against Auburn, where Broom, my man Yoni Broom, was in foul trouble. So it allowed Smith to really dominate the paint. So we'll see how that turns out here. The Vols have size. If they can get that front court into foul trouble, maybe Tolu has a nice game here. But I don't want to pay 7-1 to possibly get a nice game. Moving on, we have Creighton versus Butler. Another game, man, where I'm not that excited. There's the first 3 games on the slate just really don't move the needle for me, and that could be the wrong way to look at it, because there's some nice prices I think on the Creighton side here. But I do maybe respect that Butler defense, coaching staff, personnel a little bit too much. And maybe I'm underselling or not respecting Creighton enough. And I haven't respected Creighton since last summer. When they first got Baylor Sherman and made some moves, I thought, this team had a chance to make a deep tournament run. But as I saw the popularity and people predicting them to go to the Elite Eight and Final Four and win a championship, I was just really pumping the brakes because they didn't have a bench. They were going to have to rely on guys like Farabello and Frederick King, who was really good when Kalkbrenner was hurt, don't get me wrong. But they don't have a great bench. If they get guys in foul trouble, injuries, whatever, I'm worried about that. They're also relying on a really young group between Nembhard, Alexander, and Kaluma, who had nice freshman seasons. But what happens in second year in college, that hitting that sophomore wall, you do see the super sophomores who break out and have monster years, but then you see guys really have that cursed year where they struggle. And we've seen these guys struggle. We've seen them have great games. Kaluma, when Kalkbrenner was out, had some nice games. He's also struggled. Ryan Nembhard has really struggled with his, consistency. Trey Alexander's been all up and down over, all over the board. So it's really hard to trust these guys. I do know that Ryan Kalkbrenner at 8-2 is a phenomenal price, and I think that's a really strong overall option for single entry, head-to-heads, those kind of contests. Do I think he might be lacking a little bit of the upside in this matchup to win you a tournament? I definitely do feel that way, but I also don't think he's going to be under like 30 fantasy points in this matchup very often. Butler, Manny Bates, who has really kind of, struggled anyways, and he's been dealing with injuries, had a secret surgery recently, apparently. I don't know how that didn't come out until Butler's last game. He's going to be out, it sounds like, indefinitely. So that's a big body there in the middle to be missing. Kalkbrenner, last time they played Butler back in the end of December, had 19 points, 4 rebounds, a couple of blocks on his way to 33.5 fantasy points. Now, he was 9.1K back then, 33, just okay. But at 8-2, 33, we're going to take that all day. And I really, really like Kalkbrenner in this spot more than I probably should. And that price point is really calling to me. Would prefer him to be at home, but they already burned their home game against Butler, so they'll be on the road here. In fact, let's pull up that particular box score so we can get a little bit of an idea. Obviously, things have changed. These teams have gone, played 5, 6, 7 opponents since then. Things change. In that game, though, already mentioned Kalkbrenner's line. He was the Ken Pom MVP of the game. Ryan Nembhard, 11 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists. Arthur Kaluma, 12 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists. Baylor Sherman, 14 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 blocks, 3 steals. Kid's just a sicko. 6 turnovers, though. Doesn't hurt us. Would hurt us on FanDuel if they had slates anymore besides showdowns. Am I right? Trey Alexander, 8, 4, and 2. They played Francisco Farabello, 18 minutes off the bench. Did nothing, as you would expect. 4 rebounds, 3 assists. So not totally nothing, but nothing. And Frederick King, before the super explosion, had 10 minutes, 9 points, and 5 rebounds, 2 blocks, and a steal. Watch out for Mr. Frederick King here once Kalkbrenner goes on to the next level, whether that's EuroLeague or, Japan or the NBA. Frederick King is potentially going to be a monster in this league. For Butler, Chuck Harris had 14. Seamus Luco, 8 points, 5 rebounds. Manny Bates, 6 and 2. Really pathetic performance for him. Ali off the bench, 7 points. Jalen Thomas had 8. This is where he was starting to look pretty decent as a piece now. He's going to be taking over that spot for Manny Bates. Jaden Taylor, 9 points, 5 rebounds. Eric Hunter, nothing. 2 points in a steal. So it's not really that exciting of a game for either side, but Kalkbrenner certainly, I think Frederick King at 4-4 is at least interesting if we need a value play. The minutes aren't really there, so it's not necessarily going to be a play that we use very often. But if you're looking to do that superstars and scrubs thing, and we think that he could get back to playing, 10 to 15 minutes, he could definitely do well. That was during that streak where he was, scoring 35, 40, and then the 20 against Butler, and Kalkbrenner comes back. We'll have to see how it shakes out as we break down the slate here. There's going to be other values that emerge, but I don't hate that idea. I do, for some reason, really like Arthur Kaluma at 6'8". If you can't afford Kalkbrenner, I think Kaluma has a chance to put up a 30-plus here at 6'8". He had 22 against Butler last time out, 41 against a very, very tough UConn team, 32 against a Seton Hall defense that definitely has the athleticism to shut a guy down like Kaluma. 27 against Xavier, and then 20 against a very, very tough Providence team in which they won 73-67, impressive win. So I like Kaluma here. He's actually probably my favorite play for Creighton. I don't expect him to be very highly owned. I think he's at a price point that probably people will just overlook, but he's just, that last man in type mentality that, you have with these certain guys who end up, you have 6.5 to 7K. Who's the last guy in? Kaluma's a guy. You don't start your lineup with him, but you'll gladly use him if you end up with that salary. And then, of course, Baylor, Sherman at 8.7. Probably not paying up there. I'd rather take the discount with Kalkbrenner personally. Butler side, no Manny Bates. Jalen Thomas at 5.6. I think we'll see him be relatively popular. He was pretty chalky last time out. He had a slow start to the game. I ended up fading him. I don't remember what day that was. I think it was against Villanova. What was that? A couple of days ago. And he had a slow start. Ended up playing 32 minutes, though, and had a respectable 18, 11, and 5. Had some foul trouble there. Didn't really pay off 5, but basically did. 5.6 now. I think we'll see him be, like I said, a kind of popular option. I think he is a little bit capped in that 18 to 20 range, but that's just fine. No Manny Bates. Everyone on Butler is relatively cheap, 6.2 or under. I think he's fine to play, especially starting and expecting to get 30, 32 minutes. If he doesn't get in foul trouble, yeah, he's certainly got to be considered. Ali at 5.4, I think he makes up a nice GPP option. He has the guard forward eligibility. He really was a pretty big letdown for prop market on that Villanova matchup because he didn't beat the 14.5 PRA. With that Bates news came out, his prop went up to 16.5 PRA, and I thought I was feeling pretty good because I got that closing line value, but it didn't work out. He had a great game, though, 21 fantasy points thanks to the fact that he had a block and 3 steals. He's able to contribute in multiple categories. Not going to be much of a scorer like he was at times for Akron. There just isn't going to be that opportunity with guys like Chucky Harris and Simus and Jaden Taylor. Those guys are all going to be taking shots in front of him. So he's going to have to do it with his peripherals. But I think at 5.4, he has to be considered right along with Thomas. Not together in the same lineup, but if you're looking for a pivot off a chalkier option that's kind of a volatile chalk like Thomas, then Ollie is in play. You do have Jaden Taylor at 5.7, has really had some big games in the past. He's looked a little pedestrian the last couple, but he did have a nice stretch there against Georgetown, DePaul, and Seton Hall, where he had 24 plus fantasy points, 23 against Creighton last time they played. So I think he's in play. Seamus Lukosius. He has guard forward eligibility sitting there at 6K, coming off like just the most ridiculous game you'll see from him. Hit 5 threes, 28 real points, on his way to 45 against Villanova. Not expecting him to replicate that very often. More going to be in that 20 to 25 range, but he's a solid option, and he does have the ability to be placed as a guard or a forward, which is sometimes very important because we are short on forwards. The last couple of slates we've had are very strong in forwards, but typically we're always looking for that third forward. Where can we get it? We could play a guard as a forward. That's great. Eric Hunter at 6.1 is a no. I think he's just way too volatile. He has been since the Purdue days. He's put up a 35 against DePaul, 7 against St. John's, just all over the board, 4 against Creighton. No thanks. And then Chucky Harris is your GPP guy. He can score in bunches and can really get hot like he did against St. John's. But if his shot is off early and it's not falling at all throughout the game, it's just not going to do enough to pay off. So Thomas, Ali, Taylor, Luco, I think the order of priority is, to block is Thomas. And then second for me is Luco, Ali, and then Taylor. All right, moving on to a game that I am more excited about, 4th game in, and I finally find one that I do care about. Boston College versus North Carolina. Now, North Carolina over the weekend, Jalen Washington getting all this hype because he's, we're not going to have Pete Nance. We're not going to have Armando Bacot. As the slate is approaching, Nance is out. It's definitely a done deal. Bacot's likely not going to play. And then suddenly he does play. He does do well. And Jalen Washington, became an afterthought. Now, I didn't get him out of my lineup because I've been, doing this thing. You guys may have heard of it. It's called Life. And I was at work that day. I had to go in. And so I wasn't able to do the swap thing. And I ended up stuck with him, but I wasn't super mad about it. He had 10.5 fantasy points, whatever, at 3-4. He played 19 minutes. So with Nance out, if he continues to be out, I don't think that Jalen Washington's a complete write-off just yet. I think he's uber talented. With Bacot, there's not going to be a lot of opportunity, of course, but if they're going to still play him, 15 to 20 minutes, I think there is something there. At 4-4, it's a little tougher to maybe swallow that price point, but he's definitely not a complete write-off. We did see Puff Johnson get in the starting lineup over Pete Nance instead of Trimble. He played 26 minutes, 20 fantasy points. Puff is a guy that the fantasy industry or just basketball fans in general have been hoping would turn into something big. He plays behind some real big stars, his freshman season, and then the sophomore year, you expect him to kind of break out and have himself a season. He had some decent games, but just couldn't get it going and has really relatively largely been unused this year as well. We've seen several games where he played 2 minutes. Louisville is obviously a soft opponent compared to someone like Virginia, but we did see him play 22, 14, and 26 minutes over the last 3. So we can definitely get down with using Puff Johnson, especially if he maintains his starter status after last game, sitting there at 3-6. I think that with his guard forward eligibility, you have some flexibility there. He has shown an ability. Obviously, he wouldn't be at North Carolina if he couldn't play. He has not been able to play enough minutes to really get himself into a rhythm. And I think that's important for, basketball players in general. When you have this coaches, not saying Hubert Davis is that way, but when you have these rotations or you have the use of players where they're on the court for 2 or 3 minutes and they're getting yanked, then they're in for a minute, then they're out. There's just no way to get into any kind of rhythm when it comes to scoring the basketball. And I think that's kind of been the problem here with Puff. But it was nice to see last game him perform so well. And Seth Trimble, who had been getting the additional minutes against Wake and Notre Dame, has gone back to more of an afterthought himself, hard to use. So let's keep an eye on this one. It is, the second tier of games after the South Carolina. So it's basically the first part of the slate. We'll be able to get any news there. Baycot's obviously going to be in. Pete Nance, we'll see. He was dressed in uniform, dressed out, as college football beat writers would say, but did not play. So we'll see what happens there again if he dresses. If he ends up, being in the starting lineup, then I think we probably have to abandon ship on Puff. But it could be a scenario where Nance plays but is limited. They likely won't need him against Boston College, although with Caleb Love playing as bad as he did last game, maybe they will. So we'll see how that shakes out and monitor the news. Baycott at 10-1. He's a smash if you can fit him in there. He's just so good, barely misses. Just another fantastic, North Carolina multi-year player that's going to go down in school history as one of the best, as long as he brings home a title. So we'll see. I think RJ Davis at 8-6 is overpriced for me. Obviously, he can throw down a 50 here in this spot. Very reliant on his scoring. Does have a good passing ability. Does have the assist rate to back up. Maybe considering to pay 8-6, but that just seems like a whopper. If Baycott was out and that usage was available, I might consider it more. Shot rate's 24%, which is fine, but this doesn't move the needle for me at that price, even though he's had some nice games recently. Caleb Love sitting there at 7-5. I didn't get him out either. With Baycott, had I been paying attention or had not been at work, really busy, I probably would have abandoned ship on him too. He was a smash against Louisville, playing a lot of minutes. He took a ton of shots, right? 14. But he's just gone back to not being able to make shots again. And this was the problem that plagued him during his freshman season. He just couldn't shoot the ball. 26% three-point shooter. And then last year he works himself, over the summer, becomes a 36% three-point shooter on 258 attempts. It's like, okay, yes, the kid, he's learned how to shoot. He's making buckets. Like his junior year, and if he comes back for senior year, is going to be phenomenal. But he's gone backwards and is only shooting 28% from long range, which is really hurting. His assist rate is down slightly. His shot rate is up, so he's taking more shots, and his usage rate is about there for his career numbers. But his free throws shooting is down. Just a lot of stuff down for him. He's just regressed a lot. So I worry about Caleb Love, even though the usage rate is there. And 7.5 is an appealing price because it's Boston College, but I'm just not sure I can use Caleb Love anymore. And I don't want to be the guy that penalizes a good play for hurting us the slate prior, but he just doesn't look like a DFS play to me that is going to be optimal very regularly going forward. So I'm not using him. Leaky Black sitting there at 6.4. We need his price to go down. The days of Leaky being like 4.7 and being a last man value plug-in, those were nice, but apparently they're gone. He had that stretch from late December to early January where he was putting up like 30s all the time. Has really made his price kind of balloon out of whack. So can't really use him. The main thing is if you want to pay all the way up to Baycott and make it work, or monitor the news, see if Pete Nance ends up out, limited, not starting, and Puff Johnson, because that 3.6 Puff becomes one of the best value plays on the slate. Pete Nance, if he does play and starts at 6.6, he's actually a pretty sneaky GPP play at that price, because I think he could just totally detonate against Boston College in the right scenario. For BC, we have pardon my French, a shit show. Prices are up on guys, so that's nice. DeMar Langford is no longer free, so you don't have to worry about playing him. TJ Bickerstaff is non-factor. Quinton Post is coming off the bench and fouling like he does. Still has a high fantasy point per minute number. Still has a relatively high usage when he's out there and a pretty solid rebounding rate, and he's healthy and good to go. 27% shot rate out there, combined rebounding rate over 28%, but the minutes are just sporadic. The fouls are always the issue. It's hard. I want to keep going back to Post. In fact, the last two slates I have, his price is just so nice in that mid-6 range, but against Miami and Wake, he didn't play enough. He had the early first half foul trouble. But the fact that he had 15 and 17 minutes, had 15 and 21 minutes, like his fantasy point per minute number is high. If we can get him into the mid-20s, he can pay off the 6.5 price. But he's going to have to take turns on Baycott. We know Baycott draws a lot of fouls. He's one of the best bigs to do so. I don't trust Post on the road at all, so I'm not going to be using him here as much as I would love to go back to him and kind of torch people a little bit with that play. I think Maul at 6.9 is a pretty easy write-off as well. He's way too volatile. He can definitely get 30 plus here, but we're just, we're seeing his peripherals betray him. He's having to rely on his scoring a lot. His PRA at like 16.5, 17.5 in the prop market is always so appealing, but he's just cost me a lot of money lately, and I'm just not liking the spot for him here. So if he was the Bickerstaff price or his brother's price, I think it would be a whole different conversation. But to almost pay $7K there for Maul, it just seems a little bit out of whack to me. DeMar Langford, I think, is still an okay option at 5.6, but obviously the mid-4s was better for him. He's kind of the unsung hero of the team and somebody who has been relatively consistent overall, but that heavier price is tough. And then we have value guys in the past like Devin McLaughlin, who I think we'll be talking about a lot more next year. And Prince Aligbe, same thing, sitting there at 4.3. Aligbe's been playing 20-plus minutes pretty consistently. Against Miami, he only played 15, but the other 5 games out of the last 6, 20-plus. 4.3 is a playable option for him, and he also carries guard forward eligibility. I think I really do kind of like the setup as long as they don't transfer of Aligbe and McLaughlin, the 2 youngsters. I think they're gonna play pretty good. Aligbe has a 28% shot rate, a 27% usage rate, shooting 30% from long range. Gets to the foul line, draws almost 5 fouls per 40. So he's a pretty good prospect and guy that needs to get developed. 6'7" on the wing, can handle the ball a little bit. I definitely am a fan. I just don't know if we can use him in Maine, but I do like this spot because I think North Carolina is a pretty fantasy-friendly unit overall, and they're just not as good at defense as maybe people give them credit for. Moving on, Florida State versus Notre Dame. This is another good fantasy-friendly spot where we're starting a string of games here where I am a fan, and there is some really good targets. With the Florida State side, stop me if you've heard this before, Jalen Warley is a value option at 4.4. It's one of those ones where it's painful to click. You kind of just close your eyes and say, okay, because he's going to play lots of minutes. He's going to take, some shots. He's going to contribute and he's actually got a pretty good assist rate. He's going to put some peripherals on the board, but he's not going to make the shots very often, or he's not going to take enough, like threes because the inside is all stuffed up. He really needs to become a good 3-point shooter to really be viable. However, he has scored 20 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 5. So he's starting to come on a little bit. That's against opponents like Duke, Notre Dame, Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, Virginia. So a myriad of different opponents. Notre Dame is a pretty soft opponent. We did see him in the last game against Notre Dame, played 34 minutes, 9 points, 5 assists, 3 rebounds, 2 steals for 23 fantasy points. Like, that's perfect. If we can get a line like that, hell, even like 18 to 20 out of Worley in this spot at 4-4 is just like a phenomenal win. There's a very likely possibility that he does way less and puts up, a moderate score of 10 to 14. But I think at this point I can handle using him, and I feel pretty good about that 4-4 price. So he is currently sitting near the top of the priority list for values for me. And then, of course, also Cameron Corhen at 3.9. If the tonsil, Baba Miller suspended for 16 games, comes back, gets his feet wet a little bit, looks decent. Now he's got tonsillitis, or as RotoWire called it, a mouth injury. Kind of a weird way to phrase that. But if he's, dealing with that still and out, we're looking at some pretty big minutes for Corhen. Back-to-back games at 32 and against Wake and Virginia. When he played against Notre Dame last time, he played 31 minutes. That was without Miller. 8 for 13 from the field, 7 rebounds, 18 real points, a couple of assists, 30 fantasy points. So he's sitting there at 3.9. He's even cheaper. We know Notre Dame doesn't have a post presence that's really going to be banging down there. Nate Laszewski's much happier when he's, high post like against Cuse or taking threes, kind of that finesse player. He is capable of rebounding and banging if he has to, but it's really not where he's at his best. So Corhen could really wreak havoc against Notre Dame here, assuming he doesn't get into foul trouble. So for me, I know Florida State is always a tough one to use if you're not using Matthew Cleveland, who's been just freaking awesome this year. Caleb Mills really uneventful. Darren Green a little reliant on the scoring. So yeah, with injuries galore. But if you're really wanting to look at Florida State, and I think we should, it comes down to using Corhen or Worley. And I think there is a scenario where they both can succeed because Florida State has had a very short bench, shallow rotation, kind of the anti-Leonard Hamilton this season with the way that they've been forced to, play a short, shallow rotation. Really helps the fact that we could use 2. And they both start. Like last game, Matthew Cleveland, Caleb Mills, Darren Green, Jalen Worley, Cameron Corhen. Then we saw Tom House, Naheem McLeod, and Chandler Jackson. That was it. That was their 3 bench players, and none of them played more than 8 minutes. So if that's going to be the case and everybody's playing 30 plus in the starting lineup, then yeah, we can definitely use 2, and we can use 2 that are below 5K without a doubt. Still love Matthew Cleveland, by the way. 9K is a big price to pay. So very good. I'm worried that he's going to try to go pro after this year, but with Nil around, maybe they can keep him in college. But shit, he's so good at 9K against this team. Nobody's going to probably end up using him. He had 43, 19, and 12 against Notre Dame last time they played. I really like Cleveland here. Florida State mini stack looking pretty good, but I'm going to limit it to 2, not 3. You can do a Cleveland Corhen, Worley Corhen, Worley Cleveland, something like that. On the Notre Dame side, Nate Laszewski, man, he came through. The time to play Laszewski, they're to me they're few and far between. I know Mike Petrie is a big Laszewski guy. It's one of his guys. He'll play him all the time. And Dane Goodwin especially. This is not quite the spot that I'm necessarily looking for Nate, although I don't think it's bad by any means. He did have 12, 6, and 2 last time against them at 27.5 fantasy points. That's fine at 7-8. Coming off that big-time performance against Syracuse, his price is elevated slightly to almost 8K, which I believe is the high. Well, he was 8.5 earlier this year. I take it back, but the highest he's been in quite some time. I think he's fine there if you want to use him. Florida State's certainly not going to scare us, but I think that we can maybe spread out our funds a little bit better there. There's just a lot of risk for me with Nate Laszewski paying 8K because there's a lot of times she's going to put up that low 20 number. Dane Goodwin is playing great basketball. Lately, 3 of his last 4, he's over 30 fantasy points. Those are games against Boston College, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse. 3 of the weaker defenses in the conference. He was a clunker against Miami and a clunker against North Carolina. And a clunker for him is 20 fantasy points. Like, that's not a total torpedo. Not great, but it's not 5. And then against FSU, it was a total clunker. In 37 minutes, he really struggled. They got in his ass. 2 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. He just didn't perform very well. I do think we'll see some Goodwin ownership, maybe more than I will have. I'll be under the field there, so I'm curious to see how that shakes out, because I see him being, kind of stuck there at that 20 to 22 number, and I just think that we can spend our funds a little more wisely. Same thing with Olszewski. I think both are fine plays, but they're just not priority plays for me. Now, the guys I do like on this team remains Marcus Hammond, who I think they're going to have to rely on a lot more than they have been. JJ Starling, who oozes upside and talent, is still obviously very raw. He should certainly come back for another year. And he'll be awesome when he does. But Marcus Hammond been in, the collegiate landscape for a few years. He's a veteran. We're seeing the minutes go up. We saw him against Syracuse. That was one thing I was kicking myself, because I played Olszewski but not Hammond on that secondary slate, and I thought Hammond had a chance to break out. And he did. He hit 4 threes, 18 real points, 3 assists, 25 fantasy points. Now we're seeing the minutes for him really solidify and or creep up. Dating back to end of December against Jacksonville, 24, 27, 22, 25, 20, and 23. So we're seeing consistently the 20-plus minutes there for Marcus Hammond. Big-time scorer, at the mid-major level, somebody that does not get respect at all. I think the fantasy industry takes him for granted. And I'm thinking that, he could definitely have a big game here. It's huge to see, that he did start. He didn't start against Syracuse, which is disappointing, but he did start against Georgia Tech and North Carolina. Obviously, they're looking to rely on him more. He is sporting a pretty high usage and shot rate, over 22% on both categories. His usage rate is actually second on the team behind only JJ Starling. He is shooting 45% from long range, and that's on 40 attempts. Assist rate sitting about 16%. Steal rate almost 1.5%. So he's doing a little bit of everything. We just were worried about the minutes. He's sitting there at 4.2, which is a very cheap price. I have no problems using him and one, maybe even two of the Florida State values. It's a little unconventional sometimes to, take 3 guys from one CBB game, because people are so anti-stacking sometimes in college basketball. It really does work, though. You guys are seeing it the last couple of days. So I definitely think Hammond is a borderline main team play, and I think he'll go under-owned. We did see Trey Wirtz have a really monster game against Syracuse as well. He actually took some reps at the high post. We'll call them reps. 28 fantasy points, but 4 of his last 5 over 30 minutes. So Wirtz is not out of play at 5-1. I think he's one of those guys. I've mentioned it a couple of times. When the price points 4.9 or 5K. The second he went over 5K, it seemed like the industry kind of fell out of love with him. This mid-season, after being so cheap all of last year, but he's still a very good option. And Notre Dame is a team that typically runs a pretty short bench as well, historically. And last game, 7 guys ran 3 of their starters, 35-plus minutes. Starling and Cormac Ryan played mid-20s, Hammond 20 off the bench, and then Ben Lubin, who has looked solid at times, played 12. Freshman, still pretty raw, going to be good next year. So that short bench for both teams obviously makes us like them. But I think Hammond is the way to go, or for me, that I want to go in this game, as opposed to paying for Goodwin or Olszewski. And if the industry is looking more towards, Starling, Cormac Ryan, or Trey Wirtz, then I'm happy to still go with Marcus Hammond, who I think, if he plays 25-ish minutes, could completely break the slate, relatively speaking. Not that he's going to put up 70, but could have like a 6-7x type of number. All right, NC State versus, let's see the chat here. My man Saw in the house. Cleveland made my initial lineup. I sure hope he goes low owned. Another Irish smash is coming. Matthew Cleveland, yeah, for sure. It's good to see you, man. I haven't talked enough to Saw this year. I think he's been pretty busy with that thing called life as well. So in Dynasty, I saw you made some Dynasty trades last night there, trying to steal that last playoff spot for me, but we'll see if it happens. All right, NC State versus Georgia Tech. NC State, man, they're having some nice fantasy friendly performances, and it's not necessarily coming from my man Turk. It broke my heart to not be on Turk last slate with the rest of the chalk, because I know there was all that value paying up for guys, TJD and Turk. And Turk just it could have been bad for me because it was an extra period, but didn't really blow out the slate. He had 31 fantasy points, which is fine. at 8-9, but now he's back up to 9-4, playing against a very soft Georgia Tech team. I think the temptation will be there to go back, but man, I feel bad because I never faded him last year, and I haven't been that excited to use him this year, and I just really haven't. We did see a random Ernest Ross game last time out against Miami, 17-9. 21 minutes for 30 fantasy points. I asked my resident NC State guy who's in the Discord all the time, Aqua, and he actually used Ross. I think it was a GPP lineup. I don't, I got to give it to him because I think he was probably drunk and just uses the Wolfpack in all of his lineups. But I asked him if Ross was going to continue to see minutes, and he said probably not, but he might be keeping the sneak for himself. Sitting there at 3.5. If we think so, I know he's got access to the Wolfpack board, so I'll have to harass him to see what the actual deal is there. But if Ernest Ross is going to play big minutes like that again, then you absolutely have to consider him at 3.5. Do I think he's going to continue to see those minutes? Not a chance. But we'll see. Jack Clark injured, Morchorich, injured. Maybe we're going to see Ross continue to kind of work his way up the pecking order there. We have seen Greg Gant play really well. He's sitting there at 4.9 after jumping up to 5. He's been right around 18 to 20 fantasy points, so I think he's fine to use against Georgia Tech, a Georgia Tech team that's definitely fantasy friendly. They've got the big-bodied Rodney Howard around down there, but he's always a foul risk, so I kind of like Gant's chances of performing against him there at 4.9 if you need him. DJ Burns, I have to eat my words against Miami. I said he was not getting the same type of minutes, bumped out of the starting lineup, still really good rates, but the fact that his minutes had been, trending in the wrong direction, comes off the bench against Miami, plays 34 minutes, has a usage rate of 27%. And I did mention in the 2 games that he played only 16 minutes, his usage rate was damn near 50% in both. So that was worth definitely looking at, but I couldn't get myself to use him because of the price point, and he's still over 6K, and he comes out and just explodes for a massive 40 fantasy point game. He should have clearly be playing more minutes. The fact that he played 16 against Tech, 16 against Duke, and 19 against Clemson is just a real bad coaching job. But I know he had some foul issues. He's definitely a fouler. He did foul out in 19 against Clemson, had 4 against Duke. But you got to just have this guy on the floor doing his thing because he is just a threat to triple-double when he's out there. He's just playing so well. So I definitely like him as a large field play at 6-1, but he's obviously not going to be touching anywhere near my main lineup because he could end up playing just 15 minutes. Jarkel Joyner, I think he's probably a little bit too high priced at 7-8. It has been a really nice season for him. Playing next to Turk Smith, those two have brought out the best in each other. They just kind of cannibalize each other, and they take the top off their overall upside just a little bit too much for me. I would like to see Joyner in the low 7K range before I really start considering using him as a main team option. And then Casey Morsell is always the guy, like, depending on how you do projections, I know there's quite a bit out there now for college basketball, but Morsell is one of those guys who tends to pop up, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. I did get caught using him early on in the season after I thought he turned a corner. I think it was, let me go back and look. I think it was the game against Pitt where he was 6'4". I was like, man, I don't want to use Morsell, but he's been putting up 30s. I guess I can finally use Casey Morsell, who has been this, not realized his upside, but has a lot of hype from the past. And sure enough, he sucked against Pittsburgh in 40 minutes. So it's a never for me on Casey Morsell. It's a no for me, dog. But he's there at 6'8" and will probably look pretty good for, initial basic projections, but I wouldn't be tempted to use him. I think Greg Gant is really maybe the play I would prefer the most at 4.9. And obviously, if I knew Ernest Ross was going to get minutes. On the Georgia Tech side, I had to never would have thought that this would happen, especially now, but in the $100 GPP over the weekend, I had to sweat out a Rodney Howard, 21.5 per game. The last cash spot in that tournament, 3-point difference and like 2 minutes left. And I had to sweat out 2 Rodney Howard jumpers that thankfully missed in that last 2 minutes because I was about to lose my handle on the last cash spot, and losing it to Rodney Howard of all people would have been pretty damn disgusting and frustrating, I would think. So looking at it, we'll start with him. He's 4.7, certainly in play at 4.7 here against the Manny Baitless NC State team that doesn't have the same type of front court as yesteryear. I don't like it. If he's going to be super high owned, I typically like to pull away from him. He's just so volatile, right, with his fouls. But if he's going to get, on the floor, starting, playing 25 plus minutes at all, like he had 34 last game, don't know that that's going to continue. Has been starting pretty consistently, has played 26 plus minutes in 4 of his last 5. So the foul trouble has been at bay there to a degree. He was absolutely awful against Notre Dame, but still hasn't been getting into foul trouble. So have to think he's okay. Have to think he'll be relatively popular. He does have pretty nice rates, at least on the rebounding side, 9% offensive rebounding rate. His usage rate isn't all that high, but definitely a guy who just grinds it out and ends up being an Achilles heel of mine. So I don't love him, but I'm sure the industry will, and I'll be looking to fade him if that's the case. Davon Smith at 5'2", expect him to be popular, but Josh Pastner can rug pull at any time. You have to be ready for it. I told you guys, I took you down memory lane and sat you by the fire and told you the story about Trash Can Burrell in the Memphis days of Josh Pastner. And just when you think that you have a read on him and his rotation and a certain player under him, you get a rug pull. Right now, Davon Smith is playing really well, deserves to play big minutes, has started the season off very strong, went through a patch midseason where his minutes evaporated because that's what Pastner does. And now he's playing, pretty consistently 20, 22, 36, 31. The last 2 games especially, he scored 31. We see this. We have seen this. Lance Terry, Debo Coleman. You'll have a guy on Georgia Tech who has a couple of games strung together where he just looks like a can't miss type of option for DFS, and then he comes out and lays an egg. So I'd be a liar to say I wouldn't be terrified to use Davon Smith or anyone under Josh Pastner, and that is obviously the case. But right now, Davon Smith is playing so well that I think even Pastner would be an idiot to suddenly, randomly not start him, not play him, sit him for long stretches. He should be starting and not, but playing the 31 minutes off the bench, at least we can be pretty sure that he's going to continue to play minutes. But when a guy's not starting, you truly don't ever know, especially with this coach that is one of the greats in Josh Pastner. So I love Davon Smith. It scares me, but I think at 5'2", we probably have to eat the chalk there. Feel better about that. That makes me not want to play Rodney Howard. I do think we'll see some Georgia Tech mini stacks because we've been seeing Lance Terry and Debo Coleman together. We've been seeing Lance Terry and Miles Kelly together. Rodney Howard, Miles Kelly. We've been seeing combinations of 2-man stacks from the Tech. And while I'm a big proponent of stacking in college basketball, and it's been a really good strategy and formula for me over the last 10 years that we've been doing this, I definitely don't like the idea of stacking Georgia Tech players. Did a different coach, I would love it. Debo Coleman, though, last game, 34 minutes. Rodney Howard, 34. Miles Kelly, 27. Lance Terry, 26. Jalen Moore, the 5th starter, 10 minutes. And then we saw Davon Smith play 31. Kyle Sturdivant play 20. So, yeah, Davon Smith there. Debo Coleman at 4'6", still playing big minutes. You have to like him more so than Lance Terry. Just, obviously has the ball in his hands, playing big minutes, initiating the offense, just, really more of a safer option, one that I have less fear of. Lance Terry I have more fear of. So if I have a tiebreaker between the two, I'm generally looking towards Debo. Even though Debo might not have the same upside as Terry, he doesn't have the rock bottom, sub 10 fantasy point floor as often either. Jalen Moore, kind of just an easy fade at that price. Miles Kelly has been a rock solid, 20 plus fantasy point guy, playing heavy minutes, taking lots of shots, but he's been kind of ice cold a little bit the last couple of games. Was very popular last slate, but I think, for me, I'm looking right to Davon Smith and then moving on. If you must have a second from Georgia Tech, I would recommend using Debo Coleman and not Rodney Howard, just because I think he's a little bit safer of an option. But beware those who play under that coach, because bad things happen. And if you don't believe me, you can look up Memphis Trash Can Burrell and actually probably go back and look at tweets, and you'll find tweets about it. I'll do that after the show, actually, because I'm curious, but I'm pretty sure I had a meltdown about it. All right, Kansas versus Kansas State. Who on earth could have thought that Kansas State would have this kind of roster with a budding star and Jerome Tang at their head coach? Who could have predicted it? I don't know. Uh, yeah. I kind of thought Kansas State might be good. I might have the tweets in my repertoire to back it up. Didn't think that they would be 15-2 at this point, but I honestly thought that they had a shot to make the tournament with this group. I thought NIT was inevitable, was a guarantee postseason play, which is great for them. With Tang, taking over, and at the very least, I thought a play-in game situation. And there's still plenty of time for the wheels to fall off and them not to make the tournament. I mean, the Big 12 is just a beast of a conference. Title winners come out of this conference all the time. They looked pretty regular against TCU, which was scary, but they own wins over West Virginia, Texas, Baylor, and Oklahoma State. 2 of them in overtime, just really tough as nails. This tough matchup against Kansas will really tell us a lot about where they stand as pretenders or contenders. And we're going to need to see a much better game out of Marquise Noel than what we saw against TCU. And I know that he's a pretty nice looking GPP pay up at 10-4 because it's a high price. People aren't going to be looking at it. And like I said, against TCU, he had what can be described for him as a mediocre game. He turned it over 6 times, but he still had 26.5 fantasy points. And when you think of a really bust, you're just you torpedo. Your lineup got torpedoed. It was bad. 18-20 for a guy like that. Obviously, 26 at 10K is not good, but it's just not that rock bottom score where you're like, I got to write this guy off. He has a low 4. And it tells me that the floor of Noel is typically going to be hovering around 30 at worst. And he's going to be on the court for, 39 to 40 minutes. And this matchup against Kansas, it's going to be a damn war and they're going to need him. And looking at it, 56 against West Virginia, 61 against Texas, 55 against Baylor, 41 against Oklahoma State. There's no reason he can't put up 40 plus against Kansas. Now, he's going to be guarded by DeJuan Harris. Those 2 are going to be going at it. There's going to be turnovers, probably galore between the 2, and there's going to be some really good plays on both sides. It's going to be, I saw here, it's going to be very Tyler Kolek-esque where they're going to be, doing something spectacular and then come back and do something idiotic very next play. But I like Noel's chances to have a nice game here as a lower-owned GPP type of play where he could really, bust the slate open and do well. Got to like Key Johnson there at 8.8. What he's been doing is phenomenal, but it's still a very high price. I think if this was a road game, I'd probably just mark them off. But being that they're at home, Kansas, this is a really battle-tested game that these 2 are bloodthirsty for. And Key's he's comes from a tough SEC background. He's capable of playing any opponent, so I have to like him. We still have a little bit of value here. David Ngesson, didn't warm up, didn't play on Saturday. We'll see what happens there. Bebe has been getting those minutes, although they're starting to evaporate. He's sitting there at 4-1. I think we could probably safely get away from him at this point. We do have Cam Carter at 4-5, who does represent a little bit of value just because, he's in that rotation. He's playing 20-plus minutes. He probably will get the weaker of the 2 defenders on the Kansas perimeter. It's just okay. But I think this particular spot for Kansas State, we don't have to feel like we need to use them too heavily unless you're going to go Noel or KJ. With them on the slate against softer opponents or even, the Oklahoma States and Baylors, we've had some real good luck with their value guys or Nate Tomlin. I just don't feel that good about them here in this spot for whatever reason outside of the 2 studs. I just think that they're going to struggle a little bit, the rest of the team. And if they do well, Noel's going to put them on his back. On the Kansas side, though, I certainly have a lot of interest. Kansas State games have been really fantasy-friendly throughout this season. They've been winning games when there's been a lot of fantasy points scored. I do think we see a nice game out of Jalen Wilson. He's been fairly matchup-proof, pretty consistently putting up, the mid-30s fantasy point score. At 9.3, you'd like to see that spike over 40 a little bit more, but at least you know what you're going to get with him, a very safe option. Where it gets interesting is that next tier with, Kevin McCullough, Grady Dick, KJ Adams, who has been really awesome this season, and DeJuan Harris. I have been popping the KJ Adams PRA, which has been sitting about 15.5 to 17.5. It's probably going to be much higher tomorrow, but he's been just crushing it and kind of has not come out of nowhere because he definitely had that upside and that pedigree, but he's playing way better than I think anyone could have possibly imagined. 6'9" is definitely a higher price to play for him. But if you look through and see what he's been doing in conference play, he's just consistently over 20 fantasy points, consistently playing mid-20s to low 30s minutes, and he's just not failing. 35 against Missouri, 22 against Indiana, 20 against Oklahoma State, which was kind of the low water mark. Like, oh, we got 20, damn. Texas Tech, 26, 21 against West Virginia, 35 against Oklahoma, 28 against Ohio State. Like, that's an Iowa State. And Iowa State's a team that defensively really, puts people on their heels and makes them uncomfortable, especially in the paint. And he didn't look uncomfortable in the slightest. He looked like a guy who's been doing this for the last 3 or 4 years. It's just been phenomenal to watch him grow. So I actually really like Adams here. 6'9" might be hard to find a way to get that in, depending on the rest of your build. We do have some value available to us that we've shown. So I do like him over the likes of Grady Dick and DeJuan Harris. Grady Dick had a nice game against Iowa State too, by the way, 36. But I might like him just a little less than Kevin McCullough, who I know is going to be able to handle any matchup. The floor won't bottom out. We know he's capable of putting up a big double-double, flirting with the triple-double at times. So I think I do favor him just a little bit more than Adams, but because I do tend to play, single entry a little riskier than most, I think if I'm going to use someone from Kansas not named Jalen Wilson, it would end up being KJ Adams for me. Just it's not one of my guys, but he's an honorary guy. He's wearing the team dub jersey after last weekend. Solid offensive rebounding rate, solid block rate, really nice offensive rating, one of the best on the team. Just playing really well. He slid into that role and in the starting lineup, and he's looking good. All right, so moving on to the next game, we have, speaking of the Tulane boys who did us so well over the weekend, we have them on the slate again, but when you know it, they're playing against Houston, and it is a Houston defense that we definitely need to be scared of, but fantasy-wise, they've given up some big fantasy scores to where we don't have to necessarily completely fade against them like we've had to do in the past. Now, just to continue to pat ourselves on the back a little bit, it was Jalen Forbes who had 42.5 and Jalen Cook, who was the posh play, who had 38.5. So that was a nice little, 80 spot there. Kevin Cross, you could have played him. He had 40. Taylor Hendricks on the other side had like 35. You could have had yourself a nice little 4-man stack and really, ate well. I love this Tulane team. I'm a big fan of them. I like Zion James. They have a really nice roster. They've got a nice group. They've got a coach and Hunter that knows what he's doing and is getting the most out of the talent. They are extremely young. All of these guys are going to be back. They don't have a single senior on the team, a COVID senior, I guess. But Cross will be back. Jalen Cook is still young, only technically a sophomore. Jalen Forbes has another season. Like, this Tulane team is going to be something in the American Athletic, and definitely at 12-5 at the current mark and running through their conference could be a tourney team. 6th in tempo, so play very fast. Of course, that's the thesis of what Kelvin Sampson likes to do of Houston. They're 335th in tempo, so we'll see who wins out here. Houston typically does. But looking at it, like I said, we've seen some pretty fantasy-friendly games. The game against South Florida, they gave up 31 real points to Tyler Harris, 14 and 8 to Russell Tishwa, so that was a closer game than many expected. Alabama, they did a good job of shutting down Brandon Miller, but they struggled against Noah Clowney in that game. Bama ended up winning. Bama's defense is just phenomenal right now. The UCF game, UCF really did a nice job. Darius Johnson was flirting with a triple-double for a while. Taylor Hendricks had double digits. Ethio Horton had a big game. So we're seeing Houston struggle a little bit on the road to a degree, and then against these athletic teams. UCF has some athletes similar to Tulane. And we saw Tulane just play UCF, and we saw what happened there with Hendricks, even though they didn't have Darius Johnson. So I do like still using Tulane guys. I think that people are going to be scared to use them, and for good reason, because typically you don't want to target against Houston, right? If this was a spot where Houston was at home and Jalen Cook was still ailing, I would say, yeah, this is not a good spot to target them. But I got to still look at my man Jalen Cook, who's sitting there at 7-9, still clearly underpriced for what his talent level is, how many minutes he's going to play, how many shots he's going to take. Top 20 in usage rate, sitting there at 31%. Top 30 in shot rate, sitting there at 32%. Assist rate at 31%, which is top 60. Steal rate is in the top 200 at 3.5%. Shooting 32% from long range. He has his partner, Jalen Forbes, who's shooting almost 40% from long range, a shot rate of 24.5%. And they have a slightly undersized big in Kevin Cross, but can hold his own down there with a 25% usage rate, a 20.6% defensive rebounding rate, and is drawing almost 4.5 to 5 fouls per 40. Now, everyone else around them, role players, although Zion James is starting to play really well, and he looks great, shooting 37% from long range, scoring a lot, still a young guy. Colin Holloway has really not looked very good since early on in the season, but gives them enough minutes. Jaden Coleman, Tylen Pope, they've got pieces that can kind of back up the rest of the, upper tier players, but between, Jalen Cook, Kevin Cross, Jalen Forbes, and Zion James, there's just not a lot of production left for these guys to have. Forbes has seen his price shoot up to 8-1 after back-to-back 40s. In fact, he hasn't been under 35 fantasy points since right after Christmas against Cincinnati, so he's been really good. Houston's defense, they have the horses to slow them down, but they typically, like the Cincinnati game, they'll typically pick a guy like Landers Nolly, and they'll just make life hell for them. They were able to do that to Julius as well. So they're going to have to pick one between Forbes and Cook, and that's a real tough decision. Which one do you pick? They're both red hot. They both can just dominate. I do think Forbes is playing so well that they're gonna have to put their best defender, which tends to be a lot of times Tremont Mark, but on Forbes, and which is going to let Cook maybe, run around a little bit, get, some screens and see how that works out. He'll probably have Jamal Shed on him, who is also a very good defender, high steal rate, exerts so much energy on defense. He's kind of like Isaac Healy in that way, where offense sometimes disappears from him because he's exerting so much energy on defense. They definitely have the chops to give these guys trouble, but man, that price on Jalen Cook just looks really tough to get away from. I think he'll end up playing majority of the game. And don't get it twisted. Tulsa, SMU, UCF, these teams that he's absolutely dominated, they're not anywhere near Houston's level. You do see against Memphis when he first really kind of started coming back and getting, his legs under him and conditioning. He was terrible, 2 for 12 from the field, only 8 fantasy points. That's a real possibility of it happening again here against a tough Houston team. And I'll have to sleep on it if I decide to play Jalen Cook in the, my main, my queue, whatever. But he's just way too good not to have exposure to. On the Houston side, we want exposure here as well. Tulane's a fantasy-friendly group. Marcus Sasser, of course, one of the leaders on the team. He's, after being kind of mediocre for like a month and a half, he's looking kind of like his ex-teammate, Caleb Mills, really just, chugging along there, putting up 17 to 22. He's been phenomenal lately. And he's been playing, both Houston and Tulane have had the weaker part of their schedules, UCF, SMU. So Sasser's been dominating against them, 35 against SMU, 37 against Cincinnati, 43 against USF. So he's been able to really do some dominating things. We know he's going to take a ton of shots, has a shot rate of 28.5%, usage rate of 26.4%. Might surprise some of you to hear that he's 4th currently on Ken Palm's Player of the Year rankings, which means his numbers are that good. And he's just, kind of at a slightly underpriced mark at 7.8. He's probably way safer than Jalen Cook, right? And at a similar price point. And if at the end of the day, we're going to see a lot more Sasser ownership out there than we're going to see Cook. I might be more inclined to play both of them, honestly. Jamal Shed, anytime he's under 7K, he's interesting to me because he's going to be on the floor for a lot of minutes. He's a 34 against USF, so he had to show that he could score the ball. He's capable of doing it. But he's typically going to defer so much. His assist rate has actually kind of been his strength, but lately he's been, taking more shots, trying to work on that part of his game. At 6'4", he's definitely in play, but I would still prefer Sasser. I would still prefer Jawan Roberts, whose price is up to 6'5" here. Had a bad game against USF. It was a guard game for sure. He's definitely solid. He's sitting there at 6'5". I think that'll push people off, but his rebounding rate is high. I think he can really, get into the he's 6'7". He's a little underpriced like Cross, but he's just so tough. And he does not lose many rebounds at all. It's allowed Jarris Walker to really kind of, slowly develop, and he's starting to turn into a really strong option as well. He's, played very, very well. He has been a dominant force lately. He is dealing with a illness, but he's going to play as far as I know, unless I miss something off the double check. But that flu's been going out around college basketball. Is the one that I actually had that knocked me out for almost a damn month. If he plays, he's obviously a solid look against Tulane. They just don't have the front court to take on both Walker and Roberts. If he can't play, and he's been playing so well lately, Roberts obviously becomes one of the top, for me, forwards on the slate just because of expected usage, rebounds, all that good stuff. Tremont Mark, a solid option at 5'9". Actually, probably my favorite Houston play on the slate at 5'9", and he typically is. Anytime he's under 6'9", he has a really solid shot rate sitting there at 20%. He's shooting almost 40% from long range. He doesn't necessarily excel in any one category, but he just does enough in each category to continually pay off his sub 6K price point. And we had him at under 5K a lot early on in the season. But 5'9" is definitely a good price for him against Tulane. I think we could see him kind of glide up towards like a 30-point mark. And at worst, we'll see him put up, 20, which is still livable at 5'9". So I like Tremont Mark quite a bit. Price doesn't matter. Then obviously Sasser, but if you're looking for an economical option from Houston, Tremont Mark is that guy at 5'9". If Jarris Walker is out, not only will it help Roberts, but Javier Francis, who is the garbage time king and blowout king, has a really high fantasy point per minute number. And when he's given 20 plus minutes, he just completely shreds. Now you'll have to pay 6K to find out, which is a little high. But if we got the news that Jarris is too sick to play, then Francis is definitely the guy that we would want to look to. When you look at the previous game against South Florida, when they didn't have Walker and Francis started, 21 minutes, 6 points, 6 rebounds, 3 blocks, 3 steals, just a really strong outing for the sophomore. It's really usurped Reggie Chaney. It's kind of an afterthought at this point. But I like that group. If Walker can't go, the Shed, Sasser, Mark, Francis, Roberts group, like I'm seriously tempted to play 3 out of there. Likely wouldn't do that, just play 2. But I love Houston here in the spot against my Tulane boys. Don't sleep on Jalen Cook. Is he the posh play of the day? I don't know. I don't know if I've decided on that just yet. I'm going to maybe decide as we go here. 3 more games. And the good news is I haven't been interrupted yet. Knock, knock, knock on wood. I might make it to the show without the expected interruption that I thought was coming. All right, Texas versus Iowa State. This is a game that has, fade written all over it. Starting with the Cyclones, we have Osuni sitting there at 4-3. My, how the St. Bonaventure days seem like years away, and it was just last year that he was popping off. Right now, he had a great game against Kansas in 19 minutes before fouling out. 14-6 with 3 blocks, just about 30 fantasy points. Really good to see. That's the St. Bonaventure Osuni that we're used to seeing, and we've now seen him twice in the past 4 games. He had 12 and 8 against Oklahoma back in the beginning of the month, and a pretty solid game against TCU, which he had 7, 5, 2, and 2 blocks, which is right around 20 fantasy points. I like him at 4-3, obviously, going up against Texas. They team that you typically don't want to target against, but we know that, they've gone through some drama, obviously, with the coaching staff, Chris Beard no longer there. We know their front court has not been quite as dominant as years past. They have a young freshman in there, Dylan Mitchell, who looks like a budding star of the future. Dylan Disu, Christian Bishop, who are habitually hurt, Timmy Allen, who's more of a wing, undersized 4, and then Brock Cunningham, who has got an amazing offensive rating, but when he's out there, you never really know what the hell is going on when he's out there. So I do like him in this spot here, especially when you consider the fact that they're going to be at home and maybe fouls aren't quite going to be as big of a risk as they might be sitting on the road. I know some people call bullshit on that, but you do look at games on the road and home refs, they get caught up in the excitement and they don't always call it fair at the collegiate level. They don't always call it fair at the pro level, but you see a lot of times on the road, bigs they get hit with some BS fouls, and you see it a lot more often than not. So the fact that he's at home definitely makes me feel a little bit better about using him. We're also seeing Aljaz Conk, who we know is missing a ton of time, which has opened up these additional minutes for Oshuni. Robert Jones, who we have seen play 19 plus minutes in 3 straight. He has been paying off his price in 3 straight. So he's another guy to look at there at 4-3 if you want to pivot off maybe a chalkier, more popular Oshuni. Trey King, the Iowa State boards love him. Mike Kutry loves him. He looked really good against TCU, had some foul issues against Tech, foul issues against Kansas, totally overmatched. I don't know that he's quite ready just yet to be a regular DFS play. If you're going the 50 plus lineup route, certainly get some exposure there. But when we're talking main team or 5 or less lineups, we're really looking to Oshuni or possibly Robert Jones. I don't like the guards as much. I'm never paying 7-4 for Gabe Kalshore. I know he scored 30 plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 and 5 of his last 7. But don't be tempted to use him, because the second that you think that he's turned the corner, he will throw up a 10 fantasy point game. And he's been in college forever. And he has just, if you played CBB DFS, you just know how much of a gamble it is to use him, and especially playing 7-4. Like, if you are tempted to play him, feel free to please invade my DMs or in the Discord, wherever it is we communicate, and I'll slap some damn sense into you, because you don't want to do that. And then another St. Bonaventure's player here in Jaron Holmes at 6'3". Again, if this was a St. Bonaventure version of him, I think 6'3" would be really lock and load type of play here. But he's just kind of sitting there between 18 and 20 fantasy points pretty consistently. So it's difficult for me to get there. And then we have seen Demarion Watson have his minutes increase the last couple of games. Did have 20 against Kansas, but that feels like fool's gold to me. I think we want to stick around with the Oshuni Jones level there, and they're both at the same price, and we can go ahead and play one of those guys to free up some value in the rest of our lineup. Texas side, I don't really like any of them. I have really made a hard rule, semi-hard rule, I guess, because I haven't completely faded against Iowa State all year, but I'm pretty damn close about taking guys against the Cyclones. Marcus Carr, we've seen the Minnesota version of him pop up a lot more this season than we did last year. 8.2 is a fine price for him for GPPs, but I think it's really difficult to get to that spot there in your main build against Iowa State in a game that may look a little bit more lower scoring. I know Texas gave up some. We just took advantage of it too, because the public got a little crazy with Texas. Was it the Kansas State game where it was like 116 to 103? Coming up against Oklahoma State, it was like a total of 155, 160, something like that. Mike and I were both on it a couple Saturdays ago, and it ended up being a 56 to 46 game. Now, Texas Tech game was 72-70, but still, we're looking at a game that's definitely going to be under 150. And I'd be surprised if it even got to 140, just with the way these teams play. Texas, obviously, top 100 in tempo. They like to play a little faster, but Iowa State is perfectly content turning this into a snail crawl of a game, and I think they will assert themselves a little bit much. So I don't want to play Carr. I don't want to play Timmy Allen at 7.2. Christian Bishop at 4.3, Dylan Disu at 4.8. Like, those are desperation value plays to me. I think I'd rather play the other side there. Disu at 4.8. There was a time where I would say that is an absolute unavoidable lock and load. And we did see a little bit of the Disu of old from, Vandy with TCU game where he, in 23 minutes, had 14 and 3, but then reverted back to, kind of not looking for a shot, playing timid. Did have 4 blocks against Texas Tech. That was great to see, but on offense, he's just not looked like the same guy. So hard for me to get excited about any of them. I do really like Dylan Mitchell most slates as a GPP guy, but this matchup looks like he's going to be overwhelmed to me. Moving on, Alabama versus Vanderbilt. Now, this is quickly becoming another semi-hard rule for me with Bama. Targeting against them is becoming difficult because defensively they're starting to play so violent, so good, so disciplined on that end that they're containing the other team's best players really consistently, and it's starting to frustrate a lot of DFS players because we're thinking, Alabama. It's going to be a high-paced game. It's going to be fantasy-friendly. Yes, they have in the past couple of years had a top defense, efficiency, but they've always been, giving up high fantasy points. You can target against them, feel really good about it, not have to worry too much. And this season, it's really turned around. In the first part of the year, maybe not so much, but look at what they're doing against other teams, best players. And the recent game against Arkansas, Ricky Council, he did come off the bench, had 15 real, but they forced him into 5 turnovers. Anthony Black, who had been playing really well up to that point, they completely shut him down, shot 2 of 12. Devo Davis shot 4 for 14 inside the arc, 2 of 3 out of it, did have 10 rebounds, 16 real. It was funny that he ended up being the best play. The Mitchells were, relatively contained for the most part. They're not usually big scorers, but they didn't do a whole lot. The LSU game, 106-66 total blowout. KJ Williams, who has been absolute just massive this season, moving up in competition and showing that it can be done and playing so well and being a borderline, SEC first teamer, was completely embarrassed. He did have a 32% usage rate, took 12 shots, made 4 of them, but 4 fouls, 2 turnovers, just didn't really look like himself, only played 18 minutes to completely shut him down. Derek Fountain didn't look good. Adam Miller didn't look good. Cam Hayes off the bench had 10 points, but he honestly didn't look very good. It was just a lot of contain, frustrate, just really good performances. Look at what they did against Kentucky. Oscar Tshiebwe had one of his worst games as Super Chalk there. They just completely made him irrelevant, got him into foul trouble. Cason Wallace was completely shut down, although he's been ailing lately. Severe Wheeler was the one, and Antonio Reeves, of all people, was the one who was hitting threes. But everybody else that is important, Toppin, Wallace, Tshiebwe, were contained fully by this Alabama defense. Look at it. We'll go back even into the Ole Miss game. Matthew Morrell has been having games where he's scoring 25, 26, 22 real points. They held him to 9. They're taking the other team's best scoring option and they're containing him and daring somebody else to step up. When they played Mississippi State, of course, Tolu Smith got shut down. It goes on and on in conference here. So for Vanderbilt, they don't necessarily have a guy that's like their number one scoring option. Liam Robbins has been pretty damn good. Jordan Wright's been hit or miss. I thought he was going to be a hell of a lot better than he was. Ezra Manning is a capable scorer. I suspect it'll be Robbins or Wright who they scheme to completely remove from this game. So I don't even want to take a guess at it because neither is cheap enough for me to really care about anyways in this spot against Alabama. Liam Robbins at 7'4" is okay. Jordan Wright at 6'3", even that's like an okay price for him, especially if you would have told me last year he'd be 6'3" with how good he was. I don't like either, and I don't want to try to guess because I think one of them is going to have an absolute atrocious game, like sub 10%, sub 10 points, and the other one may have 20. Just not interested. Value-wise, you have Trey Thomas at 3.5, Miles Stewart at 5K, Tyron Lawrence at 4.8. We have some guys to look at. The starting lineup continues to be the Trey Thomas, Miles Stewart, Tyron Lawrence, Colin Smith, Quentin Malora-Brown group with Jordan Wright, Liam Robbins, and Ezra Mannion coming off the bench. Now, Mannion played 11 minutes off the bench last time. Wright 23 and Liam Robbins 19. So you can't really pay up to 7.4 for Robbins anyways because of the minutes, and Jordan Wright's just so inconsistent. He had 17 real, but the peripherals weren't there for him. Lawrence took 14 shots last time, got to the foul line a total of 4 to 8 times. Miles Stewart got to the foul line a total of 8 times. Trey Thomas hit 3 threes. So you do have those value options there. They did pretty good against Arkansas, but that Bama defense waiting for the better players of Vandy to get off the bench is going to make life hell for those kind of secondary players. So I don't particularly like them too much. I suppose Trey Thomas, it's hard to get away from 3.5 there, but can we even guarantee that he's going to play 30-plus minutes again? 17 against Tennessee, 22 against Missouri, 19 against South Carolina. Like I'm not sure that isn't fool's gold. And at 17 minutes, he's putting up 6 fantasy points, 2x at 3.5. Or is that really what we're doing here? I don't know. I think Tyron Lawrence is probably the most viable value on the team, but even at 4.8, it's not great. So I just wouldn't mess around with it. I think this Alabama defense is the real deal at this point. So you don't want to get caught trying to target against them. Took me a few games to really internalize it, realize it, not keep targeting against Alabama, because for years it's been the thing to do, but right now it's not. Now, if you want to target Alabama guys, you absolutely can. Brandon Miller is on his way to the pros. Hoping he was going to be a sneak heading into the year, but he tore up the Europe tour so much that wasn't the case. Damn near 50 against LSU. Really consistent option, 30-plus fantasy points in 5 of his last 6, and it goes well beyond that, like 9 of his last 10. 9.6 is a steep price to pay. It's definitely viable. He is a great pay-up option. There is the value to make it work. He's just one of those guys where it doesn't matter what the matchup is. He's just a great overall option. You NBA guys are going to love him when he gets up there. Now, we do have value. I'm a big Jaden Bradley guy. He will be staying for another year, and he's going to be good for this Bama team. Playing roughly 20 minutes. He's sitting there at 4-4 now. His price had risen up over 5K for a while because he was playing so well, and then he got kind of, stunted a little bit. Quinterly is always looming, right? And minutes maybe sporadic for him at times, but Bradley is definitely a guy I want a lot of shares up at this price. 22.5% usage rate, 18.5% shot rate, 30.5% assist rate, which is top 70. He's drawing over 5 fouls per 40, and he's shooting 33% from long range. Still a freshman, still pretty raw, but man, he looks really good. In the starting lineup there with Miller, Sears, Noah Clowney, and Charles Bediako. I think that's the best 5 that they can run. We're seeing more minutes for Dom Welch, another St. Bonaventure guy. We're seeing more minutes for Nick Pringle, but that starting 5 gives Alabama the best chance to win, and it's a good combination of guys with different skill sets. Really like this group. But Jaden Bradley just feels too cheap. In a competitive game, if this does end up being competitive somewhat, is road. We'll see 25, possibly 30 minutes out of Bradley. We're safely looking at 21 to 22, which is perfectly fine at this price point, 4-4. He is definitely up near the top of my priority list when it comes to value. Next to Oshuni, those are 2 guys that I think are very solid. Puff Johnson, of course, depending on the Pete Nance news, and then Marcus Hammond. Like, we've got some value here we can play with, and those are the guys that I'm really looking at. Now, I have a feeling Mike and company will be looking towards Javon Quinterly. 22 off the, fantasy points in 16 minutes off the bench. If this turns into a rout, we'll see more Javon Quinterly. He's only 3.5. He has scored 18 plus in 3 of the last 4. I think that we'll see a lot of Quinterly lineups out there, and that's totally fine. I feel a little bit better about Bradley. I tend to err on the, side of safety when I can, but you definitely have to consider Quinterly here against Vanderbilt. Dom Welch at 3.3. He played 19 minutes, which was a season high for him. He was a big time, play 38 minutes a game for St. Bonaventure. They did never use their bench, big time scorer for them at times. If we start to see more, 18 to 20 minutes out of him over the next couple of games, the conversation really turns different there. And we're plugging Dom Welch in pretty much every slate, going forward, if that's the case. We'll see. I'll do some digging. Definitely a GPP pivot off the more popular Quinterly and Bradley, but we know what Welch is. We know how good he can be. And I definitely want to get some exposure there in my GPP. So I'm looking at a lot of value here in the Bama side of things. Sears at 8K. He's solid. He's playing really good. He had a weird start, especially on their Europe trip. And, with Brandon Miller getting all the hype, people forget how good Sears really is and how good he was at Ohio, threatening triple doubles all the time. He's playing some really good basketball. He's figured it out, averaging damn near 30 fantasy points per game lately. So he's a good play there. Noah Clowney has figured things out. He's a little more risky at 7.7. Charles Bediako at 5.7. I like it when he's under 5K because he is a big foul risk. However, in the starting lineup, going up against the other team's bigs, he's definitely doing some damage. He won't have to see Liam Robbins initially because he does come off the bench. Bediako will start against a weaker front court, so he'll be able to do some damage and looking like a nice GPP type of option there. But you're really wanting to look at the cheap guys or go up to Miller or play 2. Bediako, usage-wise, isn't great, but he does have an amazing offensive rebounding rate of almost 14%. He does have a block rate of 8%. If he can just stay on the floor and avoid his 6.4 fouls per 40 rate, he can definitely do some damage. We've seen him break the slate in the past. Now, it might shock you, it might not, to know that Javon Quinterly has the highest usage rate on the team at 26.2%. So if we can get some minutes for Javon Quinterly, it makes a ton of sense to use him because of his high usage rate. All right. Now we have one game left on the slate, Penn State versus Wisconsin. Starting with Penn State, I would love to do anything I can to get Jalen Pickett into my lineup, but the fact of the matter is it's 9.9K. It's a big chunk of salary against a Wisconsin team that's at least adequate on defense. But damn, Pickett's been good. This is Sienna Pickett, where he was a high usage, just monster on just crack. I don't know how else to say it. He is so good. But I do fear that he'll have trouble paying off this price against Wisconsin. Like I think it'll be a game, maybe like Indiana, 12-5-8, where it's still a really good score, 30, 35 fantasy points, but he might not hit that, high watermark 50, 45 type score that you're really looking for when you roster a Jalen Pickett. But he's still by far the best play on this team. Now we do have a little bit of value here. It's not exciting value, but Cameron Winter is there at 4.2, Keba NJ at 3.8, Andrew Funk at 4.9, Evan Mahaffey at 3.7. There are some cheapies to be had if you're kind of bouncing around trying to do a super stars and scrubs lineup, or perhaps news breaks in a way where Puff Johnson isn't a great play anymore because Nance is going to play, and you want to save some pivots for later. You do have some options that you can look at here. The starting lineup that Penn State ran when they blew the doors off Indiana was Jalen Pickett, Andrew Funk, Cameron Winter, Seth Lundy, and Keba NJ. Now, Keba had 23 minutes, Lundy 31, Winter 31, Funk 33, and Pickett 39. So Mahaffey off the bench for 13 and Miles Dredd for 15. And that was in a blowout. So we can really know that the Nittany Lions are going to be able to play a short rotation, which is always great. Cameron Winter did not. It was good to see him get back in the starting lineup. He didn't start for a game against Purdue for whatever reason, but typically when starting, he's going to play 30-ish minutes. So at 4.2, he's definitely a good look, and he definitely has experience as a guy you can rely on. When he was at Drexel, he was a high usage guy, good scorer, just great rates all around. We haven't really seen it for Penn State because Pickett's been such an amazing player, but Winter could definitely put up 18 to 20 fantasy points in the spot. In fact, he's done that in 3 of his last 4 against Iowa, Indiana, and Michigan. So at 4.2, I think he may go a little overlooked, but he's definitely a guy who is going to have more minutes than those Bama values, and maybe he's not as sexy as an option, but his floor is going to be probably a lot safer, and he's going to have the opportunity to match or exceed at lower rostership. Andrew Funk at 4.9 is at least interesting, just because of the fact that he's going to play 30-plus minutes coming off that 34. So more often than not going to put up a 12, but you do have GPP value upside there with him. Keba, sitting there at 3.8, has played 20-plus minutes in 3 straight, so you're getting the playing time with him, but the fantasy points per minute is rather low. And then Mahaffey is a guy who has been pretty solid. His fantasy point per minutes are a lot better than Keba. You see in 13 minutes against Indiana, he had 17, and 19 against Purdue, he had 18. 18 minutes against Iowa, he had 17.75. So he's doing some pretty solid things, contributing for this Penn State team. He's worth a shot in large field GPP as a value guy there at sub 10% that you could potentially look at. He has solid rates, 20% usage rate, combined rebounding rate over 20%. He does have a foul rate of almost 8 fouls before you, though, so be advised about that. On the Wisconsin side, Tyler Wall has been out, which has meant Carter Gilmore has been playing. We do expect Tyler Wall to make his return, and Lord knows they need him. Ankle injuries can be tricky. They've been having to use Carter Gilmore a lot. Carter Gilmore's defense is not nearly as good as Tyler Wall's. The reason I was so high on Geronimo for Indiana last time out was because we knew he was going to be the one that was guarded by Carter Gilmore. And not only did he pay off for us, he paid off in a huge way by going completely nuts, 12 points, 11 rebounds, and a block. Huge game for him. So if Wall during warmups can't go, has a setback, Gilmore's going to have to play a lot of minutes, and he's going to end up guarding, let's see, he would probably guard Lundy, right? And that's just, he'd guard Lundy. I think he's about guarding Seth Lundy, and Lundy would have a monster 40 fantasy point game if that's the case. So be advised about that. It is one of the last games on the slate. Gilmore can't guard. He can't defend. I don't really like, with Wall coming back, the prices on Kral and Hepburn. They got priced up because they were having to handle so much usage there. 7.3 for Kral, 7.6 for Hepburn. That's way out of control. Connor Eskin at 5.3. His price has gotten way too high with Wall back. So pretty much nobody on Wisconsin at that point, unless you want to take Tyler Wall, who it is a soft matchup against Penn State's interior when he wants to go to the paint, and especially for Kral, like, this is a matchup I could see Kral having like 15 and 10, a double-double, or a similar stat line to what he had against Michigan State, where he had 25 fantasy points. This is just a very advantageous spot for opposing bigs, but I don't want to pay 7.3 to chase that DVP, and I'm a big DVP guy. You guys know that. But there's really nobody on this Wisconsin side that I want to have. It's more so the Penn State value with Winter, Mahaffey, Funk, those type of guys. All right, and that's the slate. I will say my core is really not that exciting, but Davon Smith of Georgia Tech, which has just got danger written all over it. Feel horrible about putting him in a core, but I don't know how we get away from him. In the Houston game, I'm looking at Tremont Mark at 5.9 over Sasser. Might end up playing both of them, but Mark is a core play for me. I'm looking at this really kind of balanced look about it, which is typical for me. And then I'm really close to coring Marcus Hammond. In fact, I think I'm going to, which allows me to with a cheap core like that, it allows me and you guys to play any pay up that you want. So you don't have to rely on me to tell you who to play. They're all pretty decent. They all have varying degrees of interest. I think I'm with Saw on this one. Matthew Cleveland at that 9K price against Notre Dame. Just so consistent, so safe in a slate where there's going to be busts, as there always is. Cleveland's just that guy that's going to offer a lot of safety in that, wedged in price point between Key Johnson and Jalen Wilson. Now, Jalen Wilson is also very safe. I think you could easily play Cleveland or Wilson or both if you go with the superstars and scrubs and feel pretty damn good about your lineup. So Cleveland is the pay up that I think I'm prioritizing the most, followed by Brandon Miller, followed by Jalen Pickett in that order. But Davon Smith, Tremont Mark, and Marcus Hammond, I think that might be the cheapest core I've ever given you guys in all my years of doing this. The another slate where I'm just not super high on the pay ups. And as far as posh play, I'm very particular about who I select for posh plays. Matthew Cleveland's definitely looking like a posh play, yeah, but he's a little bit high priced here. So I'm not going to have an official posh play, but the honorary one to continue on his typical, pressure of having that title is Jalen Cook. Jalen Cook will be the honorary posh play of the day for this slate, but he is not official. Does not go in the record book, win or lose on that one. So that's the slate. PrizePicks stuff I will have in the morning. There's still, the board's not completely filled out. Same with props, same with bets. With Mike crushing it, with Adam now doing his parlays and betting stuff. The FTN bets site is just popping with college content. You guys definitely want to be a part of that. Not just DFS, but many other ways to make money when it comes to college basketball. Thank you everyone for checking me out, flying solo. Listen to me talk. I know it's a lot of Walter Waddell to listen to, but I have continued support. You guys are awesome. See y'all later. Back on tomorrow night, actually, to cover the Wednesday slate. So I'll be back here same time, 9 p.m. PST to talk it over, and then again on Friday night at 9 PST to talk about the Saturday slate. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. See ya.